All right. Do I have to say all that again? All right. We have Councillor Compton and Deputy. This sounds like very echoey. It sounds like I'm speaking at the stadium for 30,000 people. We've got Councillor Compton and Deputy Mayor McNulty online, so they'll be listening. The aim is to get through this briefing in 45 minutes so that we have a 15-minute gap between this briefing and the next briefing. And we've got Baz and Jeff, is it, who are going to take us through the slides. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. You will be aware, of course, that there's lots of change coming out of central government, and today we're really just focusing on two of those reforms to talk through those. Before I do that, just want to introduce Jeff Lawson. Jeff Lawson is the Manager of Policy at Council, so he looks after all the policies and strategies, and for his sins he also writes quite a few submissions to government on behalf of the Council, and as you will know, that's been quite a busy period for that kind of work in the last few months. So the two things we're going to look at today, and we're going to try and keep it to about maybe 15 minutes, so there's plenty of time for questions and maybe perhaps even a bit of a discussion, but what we want to talk through is simplifying local government and the rates target model, and then of course have that discussion. We are thinking of putting a submission in, which is due in February. Don't have a lot of time early in the new year, so that's why we're kind of talking to you guys now. Get some feedback, we'll write it up and then check back in with you early in Feb. There's lots of other reform happening, of course, as well. We've already made a submission on the System Improvements Bill, and there is a separate submission process for the RMA reform as well. The other bit of context that's worth mentioning is that the Mayoral Forum has agreed to work together on amalgamation options. They're looking at options and we'll be looking to engage with the community come next year, so that's a bit of context that's worth bearing in mind. And that process would, in essence, as I understand it, accelerate and supersede the simplifying local government process requirements that we're going to talk through today. So there's two things in play. Simplifying local government is quite simple. There is a formal submission that has been asked for due on the 20th of February. In essence, what it is the formation of a combined territories board by the mayors of the region will take over the roles and functions of the regional council, and their job, in essence, would be to deliver a reorganisation plan within 2 years. In terms of how those councils can work more efficiently together. The other bit of change is the rates target model. This was a cabinet decision. They're doing very targeted consultation on this, so we haven't actually been asked to provide feedback. There is an opportunity to do that through LGNZ. But in essence, they're not asking for feedback in terms of whether it's a good idea to do this. They're very much asking for feedback in terms of the methodology that they're going to use to set the targets. So slightly deeper dive into each one of those. So simplifying local government, a bit of rationale in terms why the change is coming about. Those aren't our words. We've chosen to use the words of the Minister. But in essence, the focus and the view of central government is that the current system is confusing, there's too much duplication, and it's inefficient, and it's costing ratepayers time, money and trust in the way we are currently organised. We'll all have slightly different views on that, no doubt, but that in essence is the rationale for that bit of legislation potentially being introduced down the line. From our perspective as a sector, we've also been asking for change, so it's no surprise to some degree. As a sector, we've also at length and for many years spoken about the fact that the current system, which was introduced in 1989, has some flaws with it, and particularly in the last few years we've been working with central government and asking for particularly funding changes or more tools in the toolbox to be able to do our job more effectively, and most of those related to funding. So that's worth bearing in mind. And the other thing to think about is, of course, when you think about regionalisation, it is something that we've gone down and had a look at 10 years ago. So we looked at reorganisation proposals in 2015. There was the regional council that put one forward. This council also put forward a proposal to the Local Government Commission. Most people don't know that, but we actually put in a proposal as well, which was a Metro Unitary Council. And of course, there's other things at play as well. So RMA is pushing us towards a more regional approach. To some degree, the boundaries are artificial anyway. When you think about our workforce, they all come in from the wider region. If you think about sport, that's that network in terms of whether it's sports fields or whatever, that is based on a regional basis as well. So to some degree, we've asked for change, and to some degree, we're also operating at a regional level in some services already as well. So how the Combined Territories Board works, 8 mayors from the region would form the Combined Territories Board. There are options for a Crown appointee, and like I said before, they take over the governance of the roles and functions of the Regional Council. And then they would also have to prepare a reorganisation plan within 2 years. So it's not just doing the reorganisation plan, they have responsibility for the BAU of the Regional Council as well. And as part of that reorganisation plan, you have to map all the functions in the region. You have to think about delivery models, whether things can be delivered more effectively, more efficiently. You have to do consultation, and it also needs approval from the Minister as well. So there is a backstop to it all as well. In terms of the establishment, they have talked about options. The recommended or preferred is 8 mayors from the region. Other options that they've presented is 8 mayors plus a Crown Commissioner with no vote, 8 mayors and a Commissioner with the power to veto, and then 8 mayors with a Crown Commissioner who has 50% plus of the votes. In terms of the last two options, it's with the Minister having a backstop in terms of having the right to sign off and approve the reorganisation plan, I'm not entirely convinced about the last two options. The second option, of course, is something that we have experienced before. We've had a Commissioner before. People have different views on that. Certainly from our perspective, it was useful, and so they could bring the ministerial views to those kind of discussions. But like I said, 8 mayors from the region without commissioners is the preferred model that is currently out for consultation. They've also talked about voting options. So the two options that they've talked about is 1 vote for each mayor. There is also another option for a population-based model, and that would be adjusted by a local government commission to ensure good representation. We're still digging into this a little bit. At the moment, the Greater Wellington Regional Council is ineffectively population-based. Each councillor represents, on average, about 38,000 voters or constituents. They operate within a plus and minus 10%, so I think Kapiti is the highest at around 50,000 people to one councillor. Lower Hutt's at the lowest in the lower 30s, but it is representative. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. I guess if you went the other way, if you went 1 vote for each mayor, you could end up in a situation where you have the tail wagging the dog. At the moment, I think there's one representative out of the Wairarapa. And if you went for a purely 1 vote for each mayor kind of model, you'd be having 3 votes coming out of the Wairarapa. So these are just things to consider as we make our submission. Mana whenua. So all obligations relating to mana whenua Māori remain in place through that reorganisation plan developments phase. CTBs will be required to comply with all existing provisions in the LGA and maintain the process for consultation and contribution by Māori as it is currently. So nothing is changing in that area. So the purpose of the reorganisation plan is based, the goal is to remove duplication, increase efficiency, ensure that local voice and identities are considered when designing any new model. Also considering local needs when designing any new model. And not only is it about thinking about what any future model could look like, It's also about making sure there is a structured, transparent process for getting there. So you're thinking about what could change, but also the process in terms of how to get there as well. So it's kind of a two-part piece of work that you have to do. And as part of that kind of thinking, there is a requirement to think about sharing services, joint organisations, whether CCOs for regional services, unitary organisations, and of course you need to include the community in that process as well. So you've got 2 years, but as part of that, there's community consultation, and one of the, when we went through this process in 2015, it wasn't just a one consultation process. It's actually, you have to take the community with you on these big pieces of change, and we actually had up to 2 or 3 a series of engagements with our community throughout that period. And it did take about 2 years, maybe even a little bit longer back then as well. So things to consider, and this is things to consider as we start thinking about making our submissions. Resourcing is a big issue. So the mayors have just been elected into their substantive roles, and not that long after, they would be in essence responsible for all the regional council BAU functions collectively, as well as developing a regional reorganisation plan. So the workload for the mayors substantially jumps up. Also noting though that there's the ability to create committees and appoint TLA councillors to help with that workload as well. And we've listed the existing Greater Wellington Regional Council committees that exist currently. Other things that we're still working through and a little bit unclear, leadership of the CTB, how they're appointed or how they're elected, not really covered off. In terms of the reorganisation plans, balancing the local voice and placemaking within a regional structure. The short time frame, 2 years does sound like a long period of time, but actually if you're having good conversations with your community and taking them on the journey with that takes a reasonable amount of time. The other thing to note is they're actually not that specific about the level of detail required in the reorganisation plans. So the only thing that's currently in our mind is what we did in 2015 in terms of the reorganisation proposal we made at that point in time. And that was substantively detailed. There was a lot of work and analysis that went into it, and it took a considerable amount of time. So that's something to consider as well. And the representation is the other thing to have a look at. I've talked to you about the ability to do commissioners, the voting arrangements, and the other thing to have a think about is anyone that makes decisions when sitting at that regional level was acting in interest in making decisions on behalf of the regional council. So you're kind of wearing 2 hats to some degree. A little bit like when you sit on CCOs, right? You're wearing 2 hats. When you're making a decision on behalf of a CCO, you're making a decision in the interests of that CCO. So that's one arm of the reform, quite a substantive part, and one that we have been actively asked for to make a submission on. The rates target model is something that was announced, I think, a week or 2 weeks later. That came out of Cabinet. And in essence, the cap that they're currently proposing is 2 to 4%. 2% being the midpoint inflation target, and the 4% being the nominal GDP growth rate per capita. The target applies to rates, but it excludes non-rates revenue and water charges. And in effect, it comes into effect 2029. And you can break that cap in extreme circumstances. So if there is a natural disaster, or if there is an absolute need to go beyond the 4%, then that necessitates a conversation with central government. There are options to do that, but in essence, you'd be operating within that 2 to 4%. 2029 sounds like a long time away. It isn't. In essence, the 2027 LTP has to give effect to that, and we build most of the LTP next year, right? We start in February. And so, in essence, it's going to hit a lot sooner than you think. Our starting point for the LTP is always the strategies, setting the outcomes, setting the priorities. And those are all about thinking about what a future city looks like and the steps you'll take to get there. Now you'll do that exercise, but you have to be thinking about it within a cap, and it's a completely different exercise. Also, while the cap doesn't come into effect until 2029, we have to give consideration to it before that as well. So we have to build it into our thinking and our planning. There's additional requirements around financial performance and reporting that we have to do during that period as well. Like I said before, there is some consultation going on. They're doing targeted consultation. It is quite narrow. Like I said before, it's not focused on whether we should put it in. It's focused on the methodology and the model that they're going to use to set the target. And we have the ability to make a submission through either through the Mayor in terms of meeting with ministers or through LGNZ as well. We did throw a little bit of context into some of these slides as well, just to give you a bit of bit more context in terms of why some of the rates have been increasing across councils in New Zealand, and it's actually not restricted to just Wellington. Certainly not restricted to New Zealand. It is actually global. It is a consequence, I think, of COVID to some degree. But what we have seen is a significant spike in inflationary pressures. If you look at civil infrastructure works, that's been sitting at 15% over the last few years. A high point in that is transport-related infrastructure, which is sitting at 19% per annum, and you know, a subset of that is bridges, which is sitting around 30%. So, Infometrics, who's done this research, had a look through the 21 LTPs across all TLAs, and what they found is that while 77 billion was forecast to be spent as part of those LTPs, in essence, because of those inflationary pressures, if you still want to land that same program of work, it would actually be costing you $11 billion more. So that's the CapEx side. OpEx has also seen a cumulative, a smaller increase, so a cumulative increase of about 19% over 3 years. This is across all TLAs, driven up by a range of factors, but some of that is related to infrastructure investment. That, of course, flows into borrowing costs like interest and depreciation, and interest rates have been a little bit higher than they have been as well. So that's been a factor as well. And all of that compounds into higher rates rises. And they have been the highest for the last 20 years. And that is a consequence of the operating costs that I've talked about, the labour costs, finance costs, and of course the capital program as well. So just a little bit of context as well. This is still a little bit more work in progress. We have started looking at what rates caps mean in other jurisdictions. Like I said, more work to do in this space, but what we can see, it is a bit of a mixed bag. It certainly does work. So we have seen that rates are lower, so there has been good compliance overseas, but there are pressures that in terms of other revenue sources. And we have seen a downward trend, or researchers have seen a downward trend in terms of satisfaction measures across some services. So before February, we'll do a bit more work in this space, but in essence, there are multiple themes in that area. Things to consider here. While rates will be capped, non-rates revenue is not, but it does have limits. So at the moment, I think 60% is rates funded. So, you know, if more funding comes from user fees and pays, that will have an impact on those services and who can use that, noting that also a 1% rates change is approximately $4 million. Borrowing capacity is also linked to revenue, so may limit capital expenditure increase, and, you know, long-term operating within a cap, that may result in underinvestment in infrastructure. That's something we're going to have to look at. And also, we're looking at the impact on our credit rating as well. There's already some information coming out in that area, and there is a possibility in that space as well, but early days yet. Like I said before, feels like a long way away. It's not. It's coming fast. We'll have to put it into our thinking come February 2026. There's a whole lot of efficiencies work that will be underway. Deloitte is underway. It'll get us some of the way. It's not going to get us all of the way. There will be a need to prioritise. There is going to be, in my view, an impact on levels of service, and how we work with our community and take them on that journey will be very, very important. The other point is that the model doesn't take into account that cities, the investment that cities need can be a little bit lumpy. Cities are built, like when you put pipes in the ground, you look at Parorua, for instance, it's built over a very short period of time, and so those assets mature and come of an age where they need renewal within a defined period of time. Even thinking about our earthquake strengthening, the amount of capital investment we've made over the last 5 to 6 years has been substantially higher than at any period before that. And so investment in the needs of a city, investments can be a little bit lumpy, and it doesn't really account for that. So those are all things to consider as well. I'll leave it there because I want to leave plenty of time for you to ask questions and also to give us some feedback in terms of your thoughts so we can populate a submission. And we've posted some questions on the board that might help start that conversation. We'll leave it there.
Thanks, Baz. Jeff, did you want to add anything at this point? You're happy to answer questions? Excellent. All right. I think the critical thing is that with central government change is that we have a number of choices, how we respond to it. At one end, it's total resistance and just say no, and the other end is total acquiescence and just say yes, and then in the middle is constructive engagement to get the best for our residents and constituents. So I think we have to engage. It's a question about what we do in that engagement, what we think we can get out of it. That's going to be best for the people we represent. I've got a speaking list started, so I'll start with Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Thank you. I'll start with rates and go back to CTPs. So obviously the rates capping excludes non-rates revenue, but I know in the central government context there's legislation that says the fees that you charge for services need to be somewhat reflective of the actual costs. So do we have that same constraint in local government, which means our ability to increase non-rates revenue is limited as it is, or can we be more discretionary and say, yep, $30 for a pool entry, let's go?
Look, I can't give you a definitive answer in terms of the legislation. I know for some areas there is legislation that speaks to recovery costs. I know that's what it is in parking. I'm sure it'll be the same in some of the regulatory areas. And so yes, how it impacts in terms of our other sources of revenue, what we end up charging becomes really important, because while there might be an ability in some areas to be able to charge more, how that impacts different parts of our community will have to be at the forefront of our mind.
I guess a suggestion for the submission would be, for instance, you just brought up parking. Central government sets the rates that we can recoup from parking, and that's absurd that our parking fees are the same as Gore, for instance. So I would think if you're going to move to a world where they want to provide more discretion, we may be able to control our own parking structure. Can we go up to the CTB models that you had near the start, please? Yeah, there we go. So that's sort of a rhetorical question, but in all those models, if they were applied to the Wellington region, you would have absolutely no Māori representation or mana whenua engagement under those CTBs, because I don't think there's anyone in the region that's in leadership of Māori descent even. Is that correct?
There certainly is none described on that, although it does say that all the obligations carry forward. So there's a gap there which and it isn't prescribed in the information we've had so far of whether those mayors can bring people onto that board with them. That hasn't been.
Yep.
That gap is there, but it hasn't, it hasn't said that we can't do that.
Cool. I guess going back to submission, that would be a vital part of if we were going to down the models, because otherwise we're essentially ripping out Māori representation from an entire layer of local government. Thank you.
The other thing to note is that the CTB can bring in people from the local councils to sit on committees to help build the reorganisation plan. So there is an opportunity to bring in at that level, but I think it is worth a submission point. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you. Is there any talk of when it's going to come in, when they expect to have it be operational, and is there any talk of extending the Stranium to accommodate it, as I think they've done elsewhere? Did they do that somewhere else?
I haven't heard any, have had any information in regards to that in terms of the council that has got a different, operating to a different time frame. I think you're referring to Tauranga, is that correct? Yes, yes. So that's a possibility we can raise in terms of our submission. I think that would be a good point to make. They're a little bit quiet in exactly the timeframes they expect to be able to land this, and what it would mean for the existing arrangements.
Quite get it. Oh, are they talking about one possibility is a unitary authority, and is a unitary authority where they get rid of the regional council, and which would be, in my view, a great idea. So it's just one council, like one ring rules them all. Is that what a unitary authority is?
That's what the amalgamation's about.
In essence, yes, the unitary authority operates the functions of a local council as well as a regional council.
Yep, great, thank you.
Thank you. I should add too the discussion that the mayors had at the mayoral forum was, Councillor Young, just the point you're making that the timetable the government's operating to is legislate. The legislation takes effect in 2027, so the CTBs form then. There's then a 2-year period to get a plan together, that's 2029, and then whatever the plan is, that gets implemented after that. The mayoral forum discussion was essentially about leapfrogging that process. And certainly my discussions with ministers since is that they would be amenable to accommodating that. Councillor Randall.
Yes, thank you. A couple of questions about the CBT. First of all, just to confirm, the government can't, we're doing submissions, but the government, that's going to go towards legislation that still needs to be passed before any of this can happen.
Correct.
Okay. And secondly, just to unpack that delegation capability, in terms of the mayors can delegate their representation on more detailed stuff like you explained. Can you just unpack, are the mayors got freedom to appoint who they want, or are they restricted, or what does the legislation say about the mayor's ability to have someone else represent them at particular things, for example, like the Public Transport Committee or something?
We haven't got to legislation at this point.
I understand that, but I was wondering what the information the government's put out, or the white paper that...
It is quite general at this point, that essentially that they can create, where's the... I'll find it here somewhere. Next one. So they can create subcommittees so that it enables them to, they've got those full powers which enables them to share that workload. So they can, that group of mayors, the CTB will be able to delegate within yet to be defined legislation, but will be able to enable them to manage the workload of running the regional council in the interim, as well as work on the regional plan. So they'll have the ability to work through that and bring resources on board.
Right. So just as the our current mayor can do things, for example, like appoint an independent chair to the Audit and Risk Committee. The mayors have rights to appoint, or in the future, would have a right to appoint suitable people to represent them on committees if the regional council is ongoing and we don't amalgamate. Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. First question is about the CTB establishment. So in terms of feedback going back into it, is there an opportunity to talk about, a pathway where, as like our region has indicated, they're going to be, considering amalgamation. So if there was progress on that, because obviously if you're the establishment of the CTB may look slightly different if we're actually going to be amalgamating in a few years' time. And I'm just wondering if there's a way of putting that into the submission about being clear about a different pathway.
Yeah, absolutely, and we would have to, and to some degree, it's already been publicly stated by the Mayoral Forum, right? So the proposal that the Mayoral Forum has put forward, in essence, supersedes and accelerates the simplifying local government proposal that's in front of you. Yep.
Okay, and just the other thing is, because I was reading in the media that LG and Z haven't come out one way or the other. What sort of, obviously you're going to be doing your own analysis and investigation, but what support is LG and Z providing to this council or all councils?
They will be providing support. Exactly what that looks like, I haven't seen it just yet. All I understand is that in terms of the rates target model, which is the different arm of the reform, they are not necessarily going to come out with a specific position on it, simply because mayors have different positions as well. So there's a whole lot of mayors that have campaigned on the fact that they want to reduce rates, and so it's a difficult one for them at this point in time. That's all I've heard at this stage. They'll be working through making their submissions, and when they're ready, they'll share drafts as well.
I just wonder. And this is where we pay a membership fee to LG and Z, and whether they could not necessarily come out with a position for us, but share some of their ongoing analysis to help us form our own submission rather than wait till the end when they finalise their submission.
They will do, and we will reach out to them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just on the issue about the Mayoral Forum discussion, just in order to kind of get the process correct, what we have to do at the moment is respond to the government's proposal as it is, and so we need to shape up a submission for that. The Mayor's proposal, the first stage of that is for each respective council to have a discussion about whether councils support exploring the direction that the Mayoral Forum has suggested we take. And we won't do that until early next year. So in the meantime, we should respond to the government's proposals on the basis of kind of what's in front of us. There is no agreed alternative apart from what the mayors have discussed, but it's not what the Mayoral Forum has discussed doesn't have the mandate of each respective council. So we've just got to keep it in that context, I think. Councillor Foon.
Yeah, so just regarding the CTB, I guess the water entity set up, that's been a lot of work and a whole new organisation. Have we got thinking on how this decision that the government's put in the pathway will affect us in terms of that reorganisation? So it's like a double reorganisation?
No, we haven't done that at this stage. So that's a change that's happened very, very recently. This change is very much focused in the early stages at the political level. In essence, the governance level of the regional council would cease to exist, and the mayors of the region would in essence fill that gap for a 2-year period until a reorganisation plan came forward. In terms of how that would interface with the water entity, that would be done as part of the reorganisation plan, that thinking.
So are you saying there'll be no impact on the organisation trying to manage those changes?
From the information I have at this stage, that's a yes, yeah.
Okay. Just in terms of the rates targeting, and this is a point that Councillor Calvert has brought up, but that economic development, that's a big investment for Wellington and our arts community, but that is, a major pole in our economic development strategy in terms of arts investment. And my understanding is that soft stuff is going to be the investment that will be over time the one that will be whittled away. Is that could we make that point in our submission, please? That how we recognise those soft investments as well as the infrastructure, because really, if we're investing in infrastructure, there's not going to be a lot left around the sides. Yep.
Yeah, we can make that point, and I think that's the evidence out of Australia, where they've been operating with it within a rates cap for some time, is that the money does flow towards core services, which is in essence what central government wants, but it is at the expense of some of those softer investments.
And actually, is there something that council officers could put together just in terms of just some reading over summer, I'm committing to it, on how other councils have been internationally impacted for all of us? That would be really useful.
Yes, we've got that, and we're happy to circulate that.
Thank you.
Councillor Feen. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. My questions have been asked and answered. I just wish you luck as you take on the role of regional councillor as well as mayor.
Had it my way, that wouldn't happen, but anyway. Councillor Rogers.
Just with the CTPs, was there any information included about how the decision was made as to which model would be chosen, and if a commissioner was appointed, who would be paying for it?
No, it's very light on the details.
I tend to have a strong preference for the population-based voting for the CTB. And I guess, if I'm allowed a third, which is technically the fourth question, the 2% RBNZ average basket of goods, I think that's very different to the basket of goods that a council typically consumes, and so I think it is quite detached to use the RBNZ inflation metric when we could be using like a capital goods price index or something similar. And I think you talked about that briefly around some of the goods that we do consume, but I think a more targeted basket of goods could be quite useful, and I think wouldn't be too overly burdensome to collect a range of different inputs and create a new inflation target.
No, we can happily do that. In fact, local government does have its own inflation indices that we will talk about in our submission, and just reminding you, of course, that's because we don't buy a household basket of goods. We buy concrete, steel and bitumen and all sorts of other things.
I guess we just want to, in our submission, avoid this circular argument of using an indices that is defined by our own expenditure to define our own expenditure.
Just to clarify that, they're not asking for a submission on this directly from us, so they are working with the different agencies, but so we can provide feedback into their processes.
I have to say, it presupposes that a submission process on the rates target thing is going to be rational, because it's entirely political and populist. So, just a question about effort for reward. Anyway, Councillor Compton.
Good morning. I have two quick questions. The first one is central government providing any funding to support councils actioning these reforms?
None have been mentioned so far.
Thank you. And my second question is, do the reforms around the rates cap make any mention of councils pushing funding of operating costs through to debt to essentially reduce the rates increases? So essentially delaying those hard decisions. Do they make any mention of that?
No.
Thank you.
Councillor Chung.
Thanks very much. I have two questions. First one regarding CTP establishment. Has the central government given any indication of how local communities would be represented in this organisation? Because, of course, that is a key element to what cities do to look after the smaller areas that don't have such a large voice? How can we actually integrate that into that? Have they given any indication about how that would be done?
In terms of the temporary arrangements for the next 2 years? So no, they haven't. So they have talked about that the Local Government Commission will look at, if you going with a population-based model, that they'll look at representation arrangements. They haven't stated or stipulated exactly what that means, and so that's a point there we can provide feedback on. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Second question is to do with the money, to do with our revenue. Now, because we have being cognizant of the fact that 60% of our revenue is from rates funded, rates, 40% is actually quite a large, the remaining 40% is quite a large area. What do you think the appetite is for implementing more user pays or increasing some of the cost of the service that we provide? Is there any leeway there, or do you think that there'll be so much resistance to that it wouldn't be worth it?
There will always be resistance in terms of paying more. In terms of ability to pay, that would have to be a point of further research. We are looking at household affordability issues as part of the LTP. We've got some research going on in that space early in the new year. We do know that at a rates level, some households are now getting near or going over the threshold that was set through the Shand report. So it's an area of research we're looking at as part of the LTP. My view is that there will be parts of society that will substantially struggle accessing services if we start increasing services through user fees. Yeah.
Thanks. Just on Councillor Chung's first question, just about representation of smaller communities. I understood the model is that every community gets represented through their mayor. The community is covered by the regional council, but there's a possibility of weighted voting, so that a mayor representing a larger population would have a higher weight attached to their vote compared to a mayor representing a smaller population. Is that correct?
So what we understand is that if you favour a population-based model, there is the ability to make adjustments by the Local Government Commission to ensure representation. Exactly what that means is not spelled out in any level of detail. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
So just in the proposal, one of the things that I was slightly concerned about was this section that talks about to support the reorganisation plans that the government will do a review of roles and functions to provide clarity on what responsibilities remain local and which may be centralised or discontinued. I'm just wondering if we have a review on that in our submission and how we might be involved in that process of deciding what our responsibilities in the future are.
I think this relates to some of the regulatory functions under the RMA. So they're looking at some of the functions and whether they can be best centralised or whether they sit down at the local level. So those are mostly in the RMA area.
So will we be commenting on that in our submission, or?
We can do, yep.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Can do.
Thanks.
I think it highlights the point that although the RMA legislation has been introduced to Parliament, this stuff can't be seen as sort of separate and isolated from the RMA reform. I think particularly the regional council reform stuff, the idea that a CTB comes up within 2 years, comes up with a plan about what happens, is entirely tied in with the intention of the RMA reforms, which is greater kind of rationalisation and kind of consistency and modularisation of regulation and enforcement between territorial local authorities. Councillor Tiefenbacher.
Yeah, so it's interesting because the whole proposal is to simplify local government. I'm not sure how it simplifies local government, and I'm not sure, no disrespect, I don't think any mayor has the capacity necessary to do a better job across the board while still doing their own job thing. So surely simplifying means if you're trying to solve a problem whereby you know, you've got to go to 2 different organisations to get clarity around certain projects and things. I don't see how this process actually reduces that requirement at all, and if not, how is it simpler? And can we put that in our submission somehow, whereby it just doesn't seem to make sense? And I assume that's why we're talking amalgamation, because amalgamation makes sense over this 100%.
Yes, I think that there's 2 things here. This is just an interim step to come up with a plan which solves those issues. So I'm imagining, and that might be totally wrong, but the CTB would have a short life span, having come up with an approved reorganisation plan that would be essentially they're saying, okay, you guys get together, come up with a plan, and then we will then implement that plan. So the CTB would at that point would lapse, and you would establish a new whatever the proposal is to take the local government for this area forward. Now, there are things which some of the discussions that we've had in the last few years with the community, there are areas which can be simpler. Like we've had engagement with, let's say, the sports community around, and they go, look, we deal with 5 different councils here. We're Capital Football. We're dealing with 5 different councils. You all charge us differently. You all have different relationships. We should be able to deal with it. That should be simpler for us delivering services in this for the community in this region. Now, so that's the level that I think that they're looking at to say we could do things better, but while we sit with being 8 councils, we all have 8 different sets of rules. So that's I think that's the type of situation that they're responding to. So now. Is there a simple way of doing that without, that's what they're putting on the table for us to work out.
Yeah, I get the point, but surely there must be a simpler way to do it than establish a separate entity or a separate setup to then create a separate setup, because it just doesn't work. It just seems like an interim point that's a waste of time, and probably not. And again, I don't think the mayors necessarily have the capacity of time, basically, to be able to achieve that in the best way. So, I mean, maybe in our submission maybe there should be a better solution if we have one, because it just seems crazy.
Yeah, and we can stress that point in our submission because in essence, you're doing the work of your own council, you're doing the work of the regional council, as well as a significant piece of work in terms of coming up with a reorganisation plan. Yes, it's only for 2 years, but those 2 years will be tough.
I think without speaking on behalf of government, I think the simplification is that rather than multiple sets of elections to at least for Wellington City, 2 different bodies regulating different functions. You'd have one set of elections from which at least one person, the mayor, will provide governance for both the organisations, providing different regulation to the extent there's no crossover. But I think that's the point where the mayoral forum got to is if this is about trying to get coherence and cohesion of environmental regulation and a regulation of the built environment, better to look at sort of greater consolidation. So that's it.
But wouldn't the mayors just be replacing the CEO, and you still have the organisation?
No, the organisation would still exist. It's the governance of it would change.
But that's what I mean. So really, the mayors would just be replacing one CEO. So it's almost like very limited change of structure. I mean, if you're going to change things, change them properly and get them done properly. I mean, just don't waste time in between is all I'm saying. Maybe that should be in our submission.
That's an argument, yeah. All right, unless there's any other questions, we'll conclude, and then the next briefing will start at 10:30. Thank you.